So Chetan, I just sent a ping out to the Slack. I'm going to give people 3 or 4 minutes to see if we get others to join. There's Laurel. Hi Laurel, I'm just giving people a couple minutes to join here. We should be getting started. Let's see, profiles. I want to look at that. Peter, how are you? Uh-oh. That's not a good answer. I mentioned it a couple times. I was just giving people a little more time to join, and I'm seeing now that I was on mute that whole time, so my apologies. Let's go ahead and get started if everybody can. I have an assistant sitting next to me who's rather fuzzy, so I'm going to ask her to move. Chetan, Laurel, Peter, are you there to get started?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. I see thumbs up. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into screen share. There it goes. Okay. And I just wanted to make sure my
That's the view from your window, is it?
not quite. I just wanted to make sure my do not disturb was turned on so I don't get any messages and pops-ups. So a little bit about what I wanted to do today was just sort of talk through the profile on the profile server. Jason had mentioned, sorry I didn't have it up or low enough on the screen. Jason had mentioned the publishing of the Navy Common Reference Profile, and part of what he mentioned is that he's elaborated it with the statements beyond what others have done, so he says that's a good model. And then speaking of model, I need to pull up that other document he talked to us about. I'm not sure I have that one open. So the other thing I was going to do is try and do a side-by-side a little bit, but it's going to be challenging on the size of the screen. Just to show the the documentation that he's published in the Common Reference Profile, so people can understand the value of that. So part of what he said, after we sort of did a post-interview segment, and one of the things he said was he wants to present IEEE with a version of this Common Reference Profile document that'll act as a template for others building their publications. And I'm going to see if I have that. Here it is. I have that document open, and basically what he's done is removed a lot of the Navy specific stuff, but he just set it up as a generic file, and the idea is to use this structure as a common structure as we go through the documentation process. It's a Word document, so it builds a table of contents if you use your outline tools in here. So if I go into outline view mode, you can sort of see that the headers and, in this case the tables are actually visible, which is a rarity in Word. Usually those are showing up hidden. But you can see that the indentation and the structure shows up as outline mode, and then part of what that is doing is applying styles that are living within the document, which means that for those of us who need to produce some publications like this, it's a running start. We can use the style panel up here and get into details about adding in the structure, and as we do that, it's actually going to be reflected in the table of contents, which needs to be rebuilt as you make changes, but that's actually a bit of a minimal effort. And then you see in this case he has comments turned on and visible. So as we share it, as people make changes or recommendations, we can go through and share that with team members and look at what might be needed to get the document ready for publication. And I was sort of scrolling back up here to the table of contents, select it. Actually, if I click twice, you can see it jumps to the content. So that's one of the challenges, but you want to select it and then not jump to the content. My apologies. So let me hover. There we go. By selecting out the edge, it meant it wasn't getting the mouse up to actually go. And then I've got, on the Mac, I've got the control key down, and I can click update field, and that will go through and show me a dialog box that allows me to either update page numbers or update entire table. In this case, I'm just going to do the example of updating the page numbers, and the idea is that none of the outline structure would change, but the page numbers would be updated if you added content. The other thing to realize is you can edit this. It's a bit of a challenge because it wants to link to the content, so you may have to like, for example, if I wanted to remove the tab from this, I clicked outside and I'm navigating in with the arrow keys, and then I can do a space and get rid of that other spurious tab. So that's sort of it for this document. I need to put this up in the GitHub. It's actually up there in Slack. As I mentioned in one of the earlier meetings, Jason actually shared it, I think, on the team profile Slack. So it's up there for us to see, but putting it in GitHub makes sure the whole cohort can see it. And the other thing I wanted to look at with this document, actually, let's do something first before I go into the document. I want to show some structural details. So you can look at the table of contents here and get a feel for it. But what I did with this document, or this drawing, was I sort of zoomed in and I said, well, the first section we're talking about files. The process includes opening, uploading, downloading, and closing files. And then the next section talks about pages, viewing, printing, and exiting pages. And you can see each section has its own description of what it's talking about, using menus, accessing them, and accessing menu items. There's a section for links or opening links. The like and dislike buttons. Actually, in this case, they're combined, but I separated them out to show that there's functionality both around like and dislike. And then the video and audio, that actually can be paralleled into the profile for video and audio. But what they've done is incorporated some statements, including initializing, playing, pausing, seeking, completing, and terminating. So one of the things I mentioned to Jason, he gave me the opportunity to review this document rather early. And one of the things I mentioned is some of these section headers might be good form to have some of those graphics in there as an advanced organizer. And so let's go ahead and dive in. I want to take a look at the statement details. So for example, we're talking about opening a file. If I click on that, I can scroll back to my graphic and see that we're diving into one of the sections. So this is the section numbering in the document. I'm not going to keep swooping that in and out, but I can jump back down in there and see that we want to go to the file section, past the verbs. I must have jumped somehow. Already in the pages part. Word sort of hiccuped on me. So there's downloading, uploading, and then opening. So this section is what we're talking about, this opening a file referring to. And part of that, if you scroll down beyond the header information, you can actually see that there's example statements that have been published. So I need to get outside of that scrolling window to show it to you, but this document, the side by side is the code is in both of the versions of the document, but the idea with this one being human readable, there's a good chance somebody's going to select it out of here and paste it into an editor. In this case, the xAPI profile server actually has a validator, so when they publish this information on here, it's actually been validated. So one of the things I ran into as I was copying and pasting things from the PDF, there's a few points like this one where what looks to be a carriage return gets added within the quotes, and that actually broke the JSON, especially here within the URI for the ID. It actually broke the JSON, so I put it in a JSON validator and realized that there were some added characters because it had been rendered to PDF. So this is a point where I would say you really want to come back to the profile server and gather the code, the sample code from the statement templates, and that way you wouldn't run into that issue. The other thing is and it sits within the document as well, he actually elaborates some of the requirements. So for opening the file, which is what we're looking at, these are requirements that show up. In this case, there's a section here that shows the verb and the object activity type are two of the properties that get worked on. But the statement rules are what I'm pointing at now for this section. We're actually looking at what the human readable version calls statement requirements. The profile server calls the statement rules. So you can get details on the actor name, on what the rules are there. Again, they have this code editor, and you can actually see the JSON behind that. I'm going to click back and go back to that section. And so each of these you can get into what the valid JSON looks like for that. And then some of the concepts opened in a file as a concept. Again, that ties back to show other sections of the document. So I will swoop this in one more time. The file section is where we're at, is talking about opening a file. And so this is referring to those as concepts being part of that document structure. Any questions or comments on the statement templates? Have you been using this, Peter, to build yours?
No, we haven't. So no, we didn't. I have to concede we haven't done statement templates.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of had overlooked it until Jason mentioned this, and the idea is he's building out the template details, so you can go in here and I'm sorry, the example statements. So you can go in here and pull down the JSON, and then when I tripped over the PDF file as having extra characters in it, it definitely brought it to the forefront of why I would want to do that initially.
I think it's a great thing to do. We should do it.
Yeah. We've all looked at the concepts and seen the list of concepts there. And then the other thing he and I talked about, and I've mentioned it with all of you on the call, is that, but it's becoming more forefront to me, is these are actually the ones that refer to the name of the profile that you're looking at, the Navy Common Reference Profile, as the source, are actually the original terms for this profile. And then as you scroll down, you'll see that there are some terms that have been pulled in by reference. And so those aren't source terms. But one of the key points to know is if you pull down the JSON LD, all you're getting is these original source terms with the Navy Common Reference Profile as part of that column. So,
which is what we were talking about the other meeting. We need to get onto them and say to them that they need another API call.
Yeah, I would see that as valuable. I'm going back and rebuilding that, or extending, I should say, that tool that I showed the other day to look at the profiles a little better. So I was in the process of doing that when afternoon meeting started. So it's sitting beside me, open and ready to edit, but I'm not really wanting to do that for the group. So that's really the structure that I had talked about showing in our update. I don't know if anybody has any questions about the documents or wants to see anything in specific.
I don't have any questions, but I do have a couple of comments. It's fairly common in for both Word and PDF to put in hidden characters when it comes to code, and we could simplify it by adding in a statement into the statement document saying, note, if you're going to copy this out of here, paste it into Notepad.
Yeah.
Or into a validator that it will bring in other things. So I think one of the things that's missing in these documents is that notation, that helper bit of information to remind people, because I mean, it's a lesson I learned at the hand of all of the developers that I worked with who, would remind me when my code didn't work that I copied and pasted it because I don't know how to code myself. So, but it's a simple thing to do, and it's something that we can, as part of our project, encourage other people to implement as part of their practice.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Just having the recommendation on the site would be a value add, I think. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, because you paste it into Notepad and it'll get rid of most, or you'll see any of those hidden weird characters popping up and can clean up.
Yep. And I've run into that multiple times. People hand me content in Microsoft Word, and I need to pull it into Captivate and build a course around it. And I wind up kicking myself if I do it blindly and just copy it from Word straight into Captivate, because Captivate will choke. You will get to a certain point in the file and it will no longer be able to publish.
Yeah.
And it's a hidden character that you can't visibly see. Yeah. And the only choice is, once you realize that may be the issue, is to copy and paste the text again and make sure that you're pasting plain text. And it's quite a process. So
it's a problem with JSON, it's a problem with HTML, it's a problem with CSS, it's pretty much a problem with any code that you copy and paste out of PDFs or Word or Google Docs for that matter.
Yeah.
And it's something that all of us run into, but none of us remember at the time.
Although I'd recharacterize that as a problem with Word, actually, more than any of the other products. Right. I think they're doing the right thing. I think Word's doing the wrong thing.
Well, I would argue that the Word is not meant as a repository for code. It's meant as a written documentation. So it's got formatting that it needs. that code doesn't in some cases.
It does, but when you cut and paste something out of it, why does it retain things that are specific to the product? Anyway, this is a philosophical argument. Let's not go
absolutely. Yes, perhaps they should have an option to cut text only without formatting. Like we can paste without formatting.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm doing. Is one of the things I use on the Mac is Notes, and it's sort of like Notepad. Is it has an option to paste text only, and there's a keyboard shortcut for that. So I've just put myself in the mode where, unless I absolutely have to paste a graphic, I want to paste with that keyboard shortcut down, and that way I don't get spurious characters. So I'm just making a note about our comments earlier, Peter, about having an added option to pull down JSON LD4 related terms. Chetan, were you going to make a comment?
Yeah, I had a question with respect to the profiles. Like, are you going to create profile for a specific course, or the profiles are created for, who actually decides what are the verb names, what are the statements which we are going to send? Is it the responsibility of a learning designer, or it is something which has to be discussed with a data science guy in your team, who will tell that, who will actually suggest that, that this is the data which I need, and this is how you should capture it.
Peter, do you have any comments? Nope. Okay. Let me jump back into the profile server. So
Sorry, I was on mute.
That's all right.
No, I don't.
Okay. So the recommendation that Jason and I've heard others mention is you want to start off with this profile server. There are other verb lists. There's a tin can verb list, and ADL has their I'm blanking on the name of it, their directory, if you will, the registry. There we go. So there's a tin can registry, and there's an ADL registry. And the goal of the profile server is actually to replace that and to be a starting point. And the idea is where if you pulled up a long list of terms, like I have over here in the document, verbs that were just in a long list, you might pick and choose and mix sources. The idea behind the profile server is you want to start off sort of like you have a shopping list and say, we think we'll use video, we think we'll use audio, and maybe we'll use some of these other items. So is there a large, one of the things you look at, is there a large solution that might be in place? Say badges, serious games is another example. And then like the TLA profile is actually very large as a source. The virtual patient one is not as large, but it's sort of a unique source that you might want to start with. So, to put it succinctly, which I haven't done yet, is I would recommend if you're starting that conversation, you start by sort of looking through the options here on the profile server and see if you can align yourself with a profile. And this common reference one is actually the one that Jason is wanting to recommend to IEEE as a starting point, a Dublin core, if you will, or baseline profile that other things can be added to. And the idea behind that is it then becomes a more of a uniform standard as a starting point. CMI5 also has that role. So I know you're on the CMI5 group calls. That CMI5 profile, which I think must be on the third page here, is also a good starting point. Did I overlook it? Let's try again. Here it is. So the CMI5 profile is also a good starting point. The challenge is LMSs are not yet supporting CMI5. So you may put yourself in a mode, if you start with that one now, you're ahead of the curve, but you're going to have to do development on your LMS. If you're self-hosting one, if you're building one based on WordPress or another website tool, that may be fine if you have the ability to add in that development effort. But for most people, you're looking at an LMS and an LRS as a purchase service, and you're buying something off the shelf. So CMI5, in a sense, may be an emerging profile to consider, but not yet prime time, just for the fact that the LMSs and LRSs are not quite up to speed with implementation on that.
Okay.
But the other options, the video, the audio, the common reference platform, these are using verbs that are common and common in structure and standardized and accepted already by LRSs. So that's part of why I'm focusing on it for this meeting. It is a running start on how to send content, how to go through the high level tasks that we were just talking about, opening files, sending an attachment, working with menus. There's a lot of terminology that it already has built in. And then if you go to the NETC site, they have additional profiles that they're developing that are more focused. I mean, this one in a case happens to be focused for the U.S. Navy, but there's nothing in here that says you can't adopt it and tailor it into your own vocabulary. And as I was mentioning that human readable template, that is the sort of the goal Jason had, is he wants others, as they're building a vocabulary for their own organization, to adopt what's already out there first. And one of the ideas is to adopt this documentation style and build your own, in a sense, customize and build your own reference profile. You may want to look at the verbs that are included, but you'll definitely want to look at the examples that they have in here, because even the requirements for some of the other things, I'm not quite to the content yet where I can show an example, but some of the requirements look at specific Navy or other military servers. So not quite here yet. ADLNet obviously is a common standard, but further down, some of those details will point to a Navy server. So you need to make sure that you make changes to that part of their documentation. And also within these examples, you'll see code that talks about the Navy as well. So even though it's a good starting point, a running start, I should say, it does need to be reviewed and edited by multiple eyes, in a sense, by a team. And then you'll have, once you get everybody nodding at it, that you've made the changes you need to make, you can share it out. And that's part of what I'm planning to do for a project that I'm working up for my employer, and that way we can have the documentation that's shared. Because as I'm working through this proof of concept, we are going to have only a few courses and only a few users, but the idea is, if we start with a common, start building a structure that we want to see reused and share that approach, we have a better chance of getting everybody on the same page from the beginning, rather than waiting until things have progressed and different departments have made different choices.
Yeah. Okay, and is there a way that when you say that this profile is complete, is there a tool which says that that you have implemented that profile correctly, and your profile is complete? For example, video, you have shown in your diagrams, there is initialized, played, paused, seeked, completed, right? There are 6 events which you have shown for video and audio.
Right.
But is there a possibility that you can add another event?
Certainly. The other thing to realize is, within this document, they're supporting video and audio as a common reference, and then the details on the specifics of it would be here in the video profile. This one actually does have some statement templates, so I'm glad to see that. I don't know if that's Jason's work as well. And then the concepts, as I mentioned before, some of them are native to this video profile, and I don't see any that are pulled in by reference. So all of these, in this case, are native to the profile. But you can see that this list of concepts goes well beyond what is published in here. And that's the idea. You want them to work together. This, again, is your common reference. It's a starting point for certain functionality that you expect to happen. And then project-based or team-based, depending on your departments and your work groups and what your goals are, you may need to elaborate and add in some of these verbs. And the idea is for this, the specific profile that we're looking at, the video profile on the profile server, to elaborate a little bit above and beyond what is in the common reference.
Good.
So that's sort of the approach that I would recommend, is you look at this as a starting point, meaning this document, the NETC document, and then you look at specific profiles to elaborate beyond what they define. And there's also tools. The document I mentioned, the human reference one, would allow you to customize the documentation and tailor it by adding in some of these other verbs. And I just want to sort of step back and take a look at that. Take a look at what they had under these statement templates, because I didn't really digest it. So initialized, placed, paused, seeked, completed, terminated, enable captioning, volume change, and screen change. So you can see that sort of goes above and beyond what is in the NETC one. I'm going to pull this back on the screen so we have a easier way to reference it. And it's not letting me drag. There we go. Sorry about this. There's a certain amount of manipulation because I'm in the authoring tool. But this, this sort of lets us look and see that the initiated, the played, those common ones are in here. But then there's a few that go above and beyond what is in this document. So it'd be fairly easy to extend them out and include that. I guess this is, well, no, that's telling me that was November of last year. I was going to say I wasn't sure how recently this has been elaborated, so November last year gives me a good idea. Does that help, Chetan?
Yes, yeah, this is very helpful because I was recently working on implementing the video profile, but I was not sure, whether I can change the event names.
Change what?
Change the names of the verbs, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, if I don't like initialized, because initialized, let's say it is reserved for initializing the entire course, I could actually, skip it.
Skip it or make it initialized - video.
Yeah.
If you're talking about a video element versus the whole course. I mean, that's part of the process is you do want to evaluate and validate what verbs are being used. And like you said, if you've already got one in place, you want to be able to distinguish the two and not have to query the system and get the list of verbs and then query it again against a specific subset of those verbs in a specific URI. So you wouldn't want them to be redundant, especially when you're looking at different capabilities like that, different functionality.
Right.
There was another thought, and I think I lost it. So I think, I know what it was. So the overall concept I wanted to offer was the Common Reference Platform is a good place to start for a wide, broad definition of commonality. and then you get into specific profiles for specific details. So if you're using 3D elements or VR and AR, you can start looking for libraries to be developed and published with those functionalities, because people are already talking about that. But then if you're actually building something, especially if you're building an app that's customized and it is unique and novel, that is definitely where you would want to create your own vocabulary. And the recommendation is that you build up this documentation I'm showing you internally, and if it's proprietary, you need to maintain it as internal, but ideally we want to sort of adopt it and consider it to be published in the profile server so we could share it. If it got to a point, and this is something Judy mentioned she's doing with Pebble, they started off with an existing profile, but they've extended it so much that the existing profile doesn't really cover everything they're doing. They want to take the step of building another profile that's specific to Pebble beyond just what's in PDF, that can then become a uniform standard. So the idea is other people would be able to build other applications that produce a similar format, and they could work towards some kind of interchangeability. So if you're working on building applications, you definitely want to look at building your own vocabulary above and beyond what is out there for commonality.
Got it. Yeah.
Any other comments? Sorry, I'm sort of dominating things tonight.
I was looking at the going back to our original goal that's for this team that's listed in GitHub, which is to create a primer.
Good timing.
And we got 3 weeks left. So it feels like we may be running out of time.
Yes, I understand. Sorry, I need to take a bite here.
Of course, we don't have to stop in 3 weeks.
No, we don't. That's true.
The only thing I'd add to what your very eloquent and thorough answer before, Brian, is yes, absolutely create your own profile, but then put it in the profile server.
Yeah.
Make sure it's publish it. Don't just keep it to yourself.
Document it and publish it.
Yep. I'm just making some notes here. Well, I think from my perspective, part of what I am wanting to accomplish with this meeting, talking through the profile next to the common reference profile, showing the summary graphics, in my mindset, that is a bit of a primer. That is a starting point for others. Sorry. Running out of air. So one of the things that I could do as a follow-up is to draft, I imagine it'd be a 1-pager or a 2-pager that sort of points to this other references. And one of the things we did in an earlier update was to create a short list of URLs to these other tools. And part of that, my goal for that would be to talk through the progression that has happened, the progress that's been made, starting with the tin can registry, moving into the ADL's vocabulary server. That's the name I couldn't find earlier. And now, both the ADL profile server as well as the Torrance Learning's profile flattener talk about, what those tools do. And one of the challenges that I've seen over time, and part of this was a conversation with Matt, but part of it is also what you're seeing here is, for me to navigate this, I have to look at a profile. I can go in and look at specific templates in that profile or concepts in that profile, but I don't, and maybe I'm missing it, I don't see a way to look at all the verbs and trace those verbs back to a profile. I can't start with show me everything and how many of them use initialized, how many of them have different flavors. We've talked about shoot or fire as an example of a word with different contexts, and how many of them would have different flavors of that, different URIs that it's pointing to. So that's one of the things that Torrance Learning talked about. Let me see if this works. So if I go to their tool, they refer to it as this flattener. So it starts off with sort of a blank screen, so you have to pick a profile, but it's in the, now that I realize that, it's in the same structure. So if I go to video, it's asking me to select a version. If I select the latest version, then I get a list of verbs. So I'm still not able to be presenting with all the verbs across all the profiles. So one of the challenges there for what Chetan mentioned is, if I want to be able to compare multiple verbs, you're still these tools as they exist have grouped things into profiles and made it easy to go in and shop for a profile or pick one of them and evaluate it, but it doesn't give you the option to look at all the verbs, and I think that's still a limitation. I jumped into this.
Isn't it, Brian?
Say again?
That's where your tool comes in, Brian.
That's sort of what I'm wondering. I think that's the missing part right now is, okay, if I have, and I think the other part is I sort of have the desire for something like a wizard. All right, get me started. We'll start off with a common reference profile. What do you need to add to it? Shop for a few other profiles. Is video elaborated well enough? Does it include audio? Are you including 3D and AR or other modalities I've heard them referred to? And then you get into, are there other things like Pebble and PDFs that are being annotated? The other thing they have here is the profile starter template. This is something good to know, that it's sort of aligned with Jason's document. It's a starting point for you to look at, the concepts, the templates. What else do you need to fill out as you're building one of these? I think the idea behind it is, if you have authoring capabilities on this site, you can use this as a starting point. But I think it's only, internal to Torrance Learning for that part of the capabilities. But the other things up here to explore are links on GitHub, the API version, profile documentation. So that actually, I think, will take you to the source on GitHub. So the profiles, the standard documentation for profiles. So parallel to xAPI in general, there's a 3-part document that details what that standard looks like. Here is the document that details what the profiles structure and content should look like. So this is also something to explore, especially as you're writing them. But as you're considering, how do I define what verbs are in one for custom use, there's quite a bit of documentation here that could assist with that process. So just looking through the standard in general is another thing to look at, Chetan, as you're coming across the needs for additional verbs and additional capabilities. There's a lot of information in there. So before I get too far from it, I will grab that URL and share it in the chat. If I can do it without clicking stop share, it's always value add. Share sound. That's good to know that's there. There it is. Okay. Things are changing in different apps. Sometimes they change from week to week. So, Lauren, back to your comments. Yes, let's get back to that goal and talk about what we can do to build the primer. And at this point, I mean, I'm certainly willing to accept help, but I can also draft an outline and start to build what that might look like. and bring it back to for review, or post it in the GitHub and let people review it, and then we can talk about it at the next meeting? What's your preference on approaches here?
I have no particular preference. I guess I'm curious as to who our audience is. So is this for people who know nothing about xAPI profiles? Is this for people who know nothing about xAPI and need to know about profiles? Because there's a difference there.
Oh,
right?
That's a much bigger elephant. So I would characterize it as people who are looking to learn about profiles, but then Chetan brings in the added perspective of, of his goal is, how do I define what the vocabulary should look like for a customer or a project? And I think that's sort of the broader view we want to take. It's not going to be, if you're an absolute beginner with xAPI, that's the purpose of the cohort in my perspective.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't want to try and swallow that elephant, but I could see us doing two purposes of someone who is unfamiliar with profiles and wants to know why and how to use them. And then the detailed view is someone who is looking to actually build that custom vocabulary, either for an organization or for a project. And I'm my own customer in that perspective. I'm having to do that work myself.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think initially, at least my impression was that the goal was how to use profiles, not necessarily how to create profiles.
No.
And just as we're looking at how much time we have, what we can accomplish, and what makes sense. I'm taking a course at the moment. I'm finishing up my certificate in learning experience design, and so I'm doing my final assignment. So there's like all of this shit, if you pardon the expression, going through my head about, okay, what is our goal? What's our strategy?
I understand.
I can walk it back, but I do think it's a valid point.
Yes, it is a valid
point. What's our scope? Because yes, it's true, you can do all of it, but then what's the point of all of the rest of us being here? To a certain extent.
So let's see. I'm just realizing what I did. I wrote, yeah. Okay, pull that out of there. I've got two documents open, and I'm writing in last week's update what we're talking about now for notes. So, I have to go back into share screen. I just drag things over other people's faces and expect them to be able to see it. It just doesn't work that way yet.
There are some simple things that we could do that would help us in some respects. So, for example, I know that if we had MP4s of the meetings, we can throw them into Word online. It'll transcribe them so that we have notes from those videos.
Yeah. Part of what I'm doing is sharing them in YouTube Studio, and it does that as well. I don't know that it's the best, but it's doing that as we speak. So, obviously this one is not being shared there now. I'm not streaming, but what I'm doing is after the meeting, I convert it out to a file that's then uploaded to the studio, and that is where that URL comes from. And if you go to view one of them, you can actually open the transcript up and copy and paste the text out. So good point about that, though. So as you can see, I'm just sort of capturing, but so how to use profiles, maybe I should say find and use. And then the other thing we talked about was progression. know it's abstract, but tin can registry to ADL. I think it's vocabulary server to a ADL profile server. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'm having trouble finding any of the videos.
You are. So one of the things I could tell you to do is go to xapicohort.com/teams, plural. And you might be able to type that before I get there.
Like, I mean, are you posting them to Slack?
So I think I've been piecemeal about posting them to Slack. I think each URL is there.
So are they in the GitHub then? I'm
Yes.
just trying to figure out where they all are.
So they're all in a YouTube channel, but in the GitHub discussion as opposed to the GitHub file listing.
Gotcha. So maybe that's why I'm having trouble finding them.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking in the wrong place.
And the navigation is a challenge. That's why if you go to, if you, let's see if I can drag this without losing what I'm typing. Cohort.
Yeah, I think I got it.
.com/teams. So the reason I point there, typo. This is what they use to update us during the presentation. So if you click on our group, you see the latest one, and the latest one has the latest YouTube. So I'm gonna command click that and open it in another one, and it's gonna start talking as soon as it loads. So I'm gonna try and stop it, only so we don't hear ourselves. And because I'm the author, it gives me analytics and edit video and a few other options here. But
I've been in xAPI since it was.
So there's Jason, and I wanted to see if you can go. Okay. So if you go to me, yeah, it's showing everything. But there's a playlist that I have for xAPI profile fall 2021. Also CMI5 for the ones that I've published for that group. This one is this, is this. That's a challenge. I expected it to show me the playlist. It's not. It's showing me.
Yeah, all I see in
Recording
GitHub is
in
the
progress.
week 8 update and nothing else.
And
So
then,
I'm not crazy then.
no, you're not. But-
Stuff. Beginning to worry.
Nope, and I understand that, and I apologize. I was thinking that it was easier than that to navigate. It's always a challenge to get back to these things. So the other thing to know is if you go into GitHub, we're in fall 2021, and we show up down here on that Teams page. I'm seeing all my Zoom options when I try and navigate through this stuff, so it's a challenge. And this is our update page that I'm going to stick in the chat.
You can see that, but that's all I see in GitHub.
That gives you the links to individual meetings and individual presentations. And the challenge is this is how I've been publishing it, but basically I've been, after the edits, I've been dragging that in and copying it into Slack. I don't think I just did this latest one. I don't think I did the one today. So that probably would be a good thing to do. And then
I wonder if my GitHub access is set up correctly because all I see is the current update.
If you go to this Teams URL, you're only going to get the most recent.
Okay.
If you go to this URL, you're going to see them all. So you can see the difference. This is github.com.
Gotcha.
But in order to see this one, you have to have a GitHub account. You have to have that account part of the
Yeah, no, I've
xAPI
got that.
cohort.
No, I've got it. Okay.
Okay, good.
All better now.
So I'm just trying to be transparent. There are requirements for you to be able to see this. If somebody's just watching the video on YouTube,
I'm one of the
they can't
3
get to it.
members that are in there. There are
Okay,
only
good.
3 of us in there, and I'm definitely in there. And,
yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
notice that when we were around. So
no, it's okay. It's as a product manager, I avoided our GitHub repository like the plague. It's like, I'll go to Jira, keep me away
Yeah.
from the code.
well, part of the challenge to writing these updates is every time I go in and create the GitHub, I want to go back into the first thing I create, and that's the code section. And then you actually have to go in and create the discussion, and it has to be part of the team, the xAPI cohort team section, for them to do the update the way they're doing it, which means it's dysfunctional for us as members, but it's much easier for them to manage the cohort. But that's why it's structured that way. Unfortunately, it's a bit convoluted. But back to the primer. Any other comments on what it should be, what it should have?
This looks good to me.
Okay, so
I like the idea of using the Navy reference guide as a example of a full and complete and what everything should include, because it seems to have all of that. I don't want to say that we should give people rules, but I also want to give people rules and say, document your stuff.
yeah,
It's as people grow with xAPI and as the industry grows with xAPI, it's going to be a nightmare if people don't document it. And
Yeah.
it's just going to be a cesspool of garbage. That could be one of the rules: avoid a cesspool of garbage.
Yeah, I always try to avoid cesspools of garbage. I have to admit, it doesn't sound pleasant.
I don't know. There's
I'm just
the internet seems to be a cesspool of garbage much of the time, but
yeah, you got to be careful.
Oh,
Where
well,
you
that's
step.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
So this is just sort of a logic chain of what we talked through. The common reference guide is a starting point, general profiles like CMI5, and then specific profiles like AR, VR, XR. That could be video, audio, AR, VR, XR. So I want to give some more common examples there. And then the next option is create extensions to an existing profile, meaning adding some verbs and statement approaches in that. And only finally would you create and publish another profile or a unique profile for your project. Like I mentioned, Judy with Pebble is considering doing that for Pebble because they've extended the PDF one so far that it's not really valid to say that somebody wanting to do Pebble should start with PDF in general. And then the other thing I talked about is URLs to existing tools. And since we had this up here, up and running, so part of what I did in some of the earlier weeks was I had a list of references as we talked through, resources I called them.
Yep.
So that basically is a big part of what I would include in this document. And the idea was I wanted them just in one place. And part of what we're talking about that progression is to show the registry, the tin can registry, but to show that it's out of date and people should be looking at the profile server or the vocabulary server or the flattener. And from what Jason told me, they are in the mode of sort of assessing, is the profile server ready to take on the weight from the vocabulary server? Can they shut that one down and move everything? So part of it is as we make progress, they are shutting down older tools. But I still see people pointing to that, to the tin can server and saying that's the latest when they're, when it's been outdated for a year or two, easy. So I don't really know that we need to go back any further, but I can do that.
Is there value in having a section to define some terms in our document?
Certainly. Do you have some in mind? I mean, I wrote specific to profiles, but maybe it's general xAPI.
I was thinking more along the lines of is it useful for us to define the terms or the areas specific to the profile server? So there's the profile, there's the statements, there's the I'm trying to do this from memory because I haven't got a picture in front of me.
Yep. No, I know what you mean. So, and then I don't see the screen. I've buried it. I've had so many things on the screen and off. So all of these. So
the profile details.
Yes.
What does request verification do? What's the stuff on the page? And it could be an image with, a bit of that sort of software, how to use the page sort of stuff.
I think it would help, and then it turns into sort of a help document for us and others. And then I just looked at that tab and said, well, I probably should look in there and see what's see what's already out there if it loads. That's interesting.
That's it.
Yep.
That's all you get.
So I know I've asked a question 3 times.
Yeah.
I would think it would qualify as a frequently asked question, but I got different answers each time I asked it. So
yeah.
See, to me, this is sort of strange, authoring reuse.
I wouldn't describe those as FAQs as much as that looks to me more like a getting started guide.
Yeah. I mean, profile guidelines. Yeah. The other thing, where was that other document? The ADL has a couple documents that we should be looking at too.
The other thing that crosses my mind is, do we have some best practices for testing? Or considerations, things that people should think about as they're, I mean, for one, people should think about testing. Because there's nothing worse than sending bad data to clogging up their LRS with bad data.
I'm getting to the point where I'm really looking forward to reading this document.
Hey, we may not be able to accomplish all of this, but again,
Yeah. So catapults. That's a starting point. It's not the right one, but it's a category.
Some of this could go into the next cohort.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, easily.
Yeah.
So what I did was I navigated to ADL and I'm looking at their projects. And if I remember right, profile server is on here. Maybe? Standard? No, I don't see it. Visualization. So Pebble details. All right, how can that be?
I think that's Pebble, but not Pebble Pro, which is the public
Right.
version,
That's
which I think is what Judy's managing.
right. There we go. That's exactly what I was looking for. So there's some how-to guides in here, including profile server user guide and authoring guide. Well, guess what? I would make the case that they're one and the same. Why? Because the user guide talks about using the site to author. I think they lost their scope. So it's a walkthrough of every feature of the profile server. But if you get into some of the details on this in this section, it touches very very handily. So it's really like a document for Peter or Judy who are using the website, the profile server to author profiles. And that's part of why I wanted to have this project and to have the primer as an output, because I'm looking at these two documents going, that's not what I need. I need to use the profiles, not author them. Server Administrator Guide. See, they talk about three of them, and I only see two. They must still be working on the admin guide. Go ahead.
That is one of the. So now that I've got this profile, where do I put it? Does it go into my as a call out in my Captivate or Articulate course somewhere in a puddle of JSON in there?
Yes.
Does it go into my learning management system?
Oh, I see. You're wanting that as part of the document. You just made this document huge.
Well, hey, like I said, we can narrow scope.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But if the concept is how to find and use profiles, then what you do with the profile is
very much so.
Yeah. I mean, if I were building an LMS or an LXP, I'd want to know.
Yep.
Because I'd probably be embedding those profiles in the content types that I'm creating, or that my customers will create.
Sometimes I don't like autocorrect. So it changed profile into price. So Chetan, are we answering questions or causing more of them to be generated?
And are we missing any potential topics that we should either put into scope or take out of scope? Because you're right, I've made the document huge, but
No, I don't see anything in there that didn't need to be there. It's just I hadn't thought of it. But like I said, I'm looking forward to reading it.
Well, the next thing we'll have to figure out is who's going to write which bits.
I just don't want to have to write it first. Yeah.
I think a lot of the, I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of the information is out there. It's just in
Different places.
yeah, it's not collected up in one nice, neat place. It's in some of the videos that we've watched, and in the xAPI cohort presentations that we've seen, and well, less so that, but certainly the people who presented content to us.
Yeah, and I
Which
think
is why I was asking about the notes, because, you know, if you've got a transcript that you can look at, it's much easier to pull those blurbs out and sort of throw them into a document and clean it up than do stuff from scratch.
Yep. That might be part of what we do. Okay.
I am a lazy content creator in that respect. Sorry, efficient content creator.
So I'll take a swipe at a first draft. Is there anything out there you want to try and tackle? So I'll leave that as an open-ended question. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if there's something you think you have references or answers for, that might be a helpful thing, just to pull some things together. And at this point, you know, like we've sort of hinted at, if it's out there, I just want to copy and paste and reuse. And you know, I tend to over document where I'm pulling stuff from, and that way, if I only give a paragraph or two and say here's the rest, then I'm not leaving them hanging. Yeah. You know, and that way I'm just seeing it as a summary, but it could be 5 pages. You never know. It could be 30.
Yeah. I can take I can take the easy bit and take a stab at the server page and what all of the bits and pieces on the page mean.
Okay. These two?
Since that's fairly straightforward, but I think you may need to send me the URL, because I think
I can put them in the chat.
It's hidden. Yeah.
That's okay.
I keep getting a 404 error.
So this is probably the one you need with both of them, but I'll give you the 3 that I pulled up. And you can see they have navigation on the side. So once you get into the authoring guide, here's the outline for it. Once you get into the server user guide, here's the outline for it. And then if you go to this page, I guess that's really why I was confused. Is here they just call it user guide, but if they're calling it the server user guide, it's exactly what they expected it to be, but it's not what I expected it to be when I saw user guide. Server guide makes sense. User guide did not make sense to me, because this does detail quite a bit of the website and get into all those bits and pieces we were talking about. Do we need to document that? I don't see the need for all these screen grabs, but I could certainly see just describing the text that there's a section on rules. We don't need to add rules, but like rules, and each little header becomes just a bits and a piece. And like I said, with a note at the bottom, here's where this was pulled from, and you can get more information. But
I'm wondering if part of the document or one of the approaches could be getting ready to create your profile and all of the things that you need to think about, which would be, what are your rules and what verbs are you using, and that it's, again, it depends upon the scope and the audience and what because well, again, that comes back into how to create a profile rather than how to use a profile.
Yeah, and that's what I'm writing down here is I sort of see that as in the not column.
Yeah.
And you know, I wouldn't have a problem with pointing to these two documents as
Yeah.
a place to start that discussion. But I mean, I almost see this as an introductory paragraph saying, here's what we're going to talk about. The larger view is this, and it doesn't include these things. If you want these
Yeah.
things, you might want to look in these places. You know,
Yeah.
so
No, that makes sense. I mean, you could start drafting it, or if you wanted to draft an outline in our next meeting, we can figure out who's going to do what.
yeah.
Or you can assign something to me, and I will go off and try.
Well, if you want to take a look at these pages for the server, I'm fine with that as being a good starting point for someone.
Yeah.
And I'll just put that you're looking at that page. And next week we'll review, you know, I'll revise this into an outline and start adding some content to it. And then we'll review that and see if we need to elaborate
Yeah.
what and where. And it looks like Peter had to drop. I'm sure his day has started. We did get a note from Julian that he wasn't able to attend. I saw something in Slack. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Chetan, you've turned quiet. Are you dozing or are you getting what you need?
Actually, I'm not keeping well, and it is now 5 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, I knew it was early for you. I apologize for that.
No problem.
Okay.
But I think we're at a point where we can wrap up and
Yeah.
say thank you and good night.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks.
You're welcome, Laurel.
Bye.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. And done. That's the trouble. Stop share. Didn't realize there was a pause share.